Rain hammered the outer walls of Bastion Refuge like a warning. The survivors inside barely flinched anymore. They'd grown used to thunder and screaming wind, it was the silence they feared now. That unnatural hush when the dead were near. Perched on a snow-dusted mesa in the ruins of what was once western Colorado, Bastion was humanity's last hope, at least that's what the leaders kept saying over the loudspeakers. Once a military installation, it had become a self-contained fortress. 3 layers of reinforced fencing, sniper towers every 100 yards, food hydroponics, and a network of underground tunnels. It was a miracle. But even miracles had cracks. On the east watchtower, Corporal Rachel DeWitt scanned the black horizon. She was 30, sharp-eyed, her rifle resting steady on the ledge. Her breath fogged in the cold. She'd been on watch since dusk. The floodlights reached out into the dark, barely touching the jagged tree line. Beyond that was nothing but the howling unknown. And in that unknown, something moved. "Command, this is East Watch," Rachel said into her radio. "Possible movement at Grid Foxtrot 5. Requesting IR sweep." A voice crackled back. "Copy that, DeWitt. Thermal sweep initiated. Stand by." She adjusted her scope, heartbeat steady but coiled. Rachel wasn't new to this. She'd survived the fall of Minneapolis, watched friends get torn apart in the Seattle retreat, and lost her family during the caravan exodus. Bastion was her last stand. It had to hold. The thermal scan lit up the terrain in red and blue hues. For a moment, all was calm. Then, faint blips. Moving fast. Not a herd. Not yet. Scouts. The smart ones. Rachel muttered under her breath, "They're testing us again." She radioed down. Confirmed hostiles. Small group. Estimated 5 to 7 runners. They're probing the perimeter. On the ground below, Commander Hayes was already moving. A former Marine with iron-gray hair and a stare that could freeze fire, he paced the command tent with calm urgency. "Deploy perimeter Team Bravo," he barked. Quietly. "No spotlights, no gunfire unless necessary. I want one of them captured. We need to know if this is another wave or something worse." Across the compound, alarms didn't blare. Bastion didn't panic. Instead, soldiers slid into black tactical gear, rifles primed with subsonic rounds. Silence was their strongest defense. Too much noise, and the Horde would come. Inside the med bay, Dr. Mary Tanaka stared at her tablet screen. Vital signs of infected subjects from the last scouting mission showed an alarming pattern, shorter dormant phases and signs of memory reflex. Some of the undead were changing. She looked up at her assistant. "If the infection is evolving, Bastion won't survive a direct siege." "You should tell Hayes," the assistant said. "I need proof first," she replied grimly. Back on the outer perimeter, Bravo team melted into the trees. Night vision goggles turned the forest into a dream of green shadows. Sergeant Mateo Reyes led the team, his breath misting in the cold as he raised a fist. "Halt. There." 50 meters out. One of them, a female runner, crouched low like a predator. Her skin was tight and pale, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She wasn't moaning. She was watching. Reyes whispered, "They're communicating." Another broke cover behind her. Then a third. This wasn't a random scout party. It was coordinated. He tapped his radio. "Contact. They're moving with intent. Not a breach attempt, this is reconnaissance." As if in answer, one of the runners shrieked. Not the guttural groan of a lost soul. No. This was a signal. All hell broke loose. From the trees, dozens more poured out, silent at first, then screaming. Bastion's outer sensors triggered. Floodlights blazed. The once quiet night turned red and furious. Rachel fired from the tower, picking off the front wave. Alarms sounded inside the walls now. The time for stealth was over. "Damn it!" Hayes shouted as the dead hit the fences. Sparks flew. The metal groaned. In the chaos, a captured runner, strapped to a gurney in Dr. Tanaka's lab, suddenly arched its back. Monitors spiked. Its jaw moved, not snarling, but whispering something. Over and over. Refuge won't last. Refuge won't last. Tanaka froze. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the battlefield below in stark flashes. The undead clawed at the outermost fence, piling against one another in a frenzy. Bullets ripped through rotted flesh, but for every corpse that fell, another surged forward. Inside Bastion's command center, Commander Hayes barked orders over the radio. Activate secondary defense grid. Focus fire on breach points Bravo and Delta. Where the hell are those mortars? Mortars en route, came the reply. ETA 3 minutes. Make it 1. Rachel DeWitt crouched behind a mounted turret atop the east wall. Her fingers were numb from the cold, but her aim never wavered. The runners were the worst, fast, twitchy, and unpredictable. And smarter than they had any right to be. She squeezed the trigger. One runner, charging at the gate with wild speed, dropped instantly. Another appeared behind it, sprinting low like a trained soldier. They're adapting, she muttered. At that moment, her radio crackled again. East Watch, this is Lab Command. We have a situation. Dr. Tanaka needs to see the commander immediately. Rachel frowned. She's picking one hell of a time. Inside the medical wing, Dr. Tanaka stood frozen in front of the restrained corpse. The runner strapped to the gurney was twitching violently. Its milky eyes rolled beneath its lids, and its jaw worked soundlessly now. The whispering had stopped. I saw it. I swear it was mimicking speech, she said, breath trembling. It was trying to communicate. Commander Hayes entered moments later, soaked and furious. Tanaka, you better have a damn good reason for dragging me out of a battle. She turned the monitor to him. I recorded everything. It said, Refuge won't last. Not once, multiple times. No slurring, no growl. Actual words. Language. Hayes leaned in, jaw tightening. That's not possible. I thought so too. But I've seen fluctuations in neural activity. This runner isn't just repeating something it heard. It's thinking. Strategizing. Are you saying the infected are becoming sentient? I'm saying, Tanaka said grimly, that some already are. Hayes didn't respond immediately. His silence said more than words ever could. Then he turned toward his comms officer. Tag this subject Priority 1. Double security. Nobody gets near it without my clearance. Outside, the defense is held, for now. The first wave had broken against the electrified fences and gunfire, but more could come. And judging by the scouts' behavior, they would. In the refugee bunkers below, civilians huddled in dim light. Children cried softly. The walls shook with every mortar blast. Hope, once abundant in Bastion, was thinning like blood in snow. In one corner of the barracks, a former schoolteacher named Iris held her teenage son close. He clutched a hand-drawn map of the fortress, his lips moving in silent prayer. Not to a god, but to anyone, anything, that would help them survive the night. At the outer gate, Bravo team returned. Bloodied. 2 down. 1 infected and quarantined. Sergeant Mateo Reyes slammed his helmet down on the table inside the debriefing room. They weren't just attacking. They were observing. Waiting for the right moment to hit weak points. Hayes walked in just then. We noticed. They worked like a pack. Communicated with gestures. One even flanked us. If we hadn't pulled back, you'd be dead, Hayes finished for him. We're seeing it too. And Tanaka's confirmed something worse. What's worse than a smarter zombie? A smarter army, Hayes replied. If they start organizing like us, if they can speak, command, plan, it's not just a siege. It's a war. Reyes sat down, staring at the floor. We've been preparing for waves of monsters. Not generals. By dawn, Bastion's walls were slick with gore. The snow had turned gray, and smoke curled upward from fire-blackened pits. The air reeked of rot and ozone. They'd survived the night, but barely. Rachel slumped into a chair near the mess hall. Her muscles screamed, but she couldn't sleep. Not after what she'd seen. She reached for the worn photo in her jacket, her squad from Seattle. Every single one dead. Except her. She couldn't do this again. She wouldn't. A low, mechanical beep interrupted her thoughts. A message scrolled across her comm tablet. Signal intercepted, unknown source, frequency 13.7. Message, we are watching. The fortress is a cage. And cages break. Her heart dropped. She ran for the command tent, the message still glowing on her screen. Inside, Hayes read it with her. Then the lights in Bastion flickered. A second message appeared. Shorter this time. More direct. The next night will be your last. The cold morning air hung heavy with tension. Bastion's walls still bore the scars of the night's savage attack, dents in the metal, scorched wood, and blood smears frozen in patches. The survivors moved like shadows, exhausted yet alert. There was no time to rest. The endless night was coming, and it would be worse. Commander Hayes stared at the perimeter monitors, his face tight with worry. The intercepted messages gnawed at his mind. Whoever, or whatever, was sending them was close. They knew Bastion's weaknesses. Double the patrols, he ordered. No one goes beyond the fences without a squad. I want eyes everywhere. Rachel DeWitt checked her rifle, tension coiling in her shoulders. Every twitch in the bushes, every crack of a twig made her flinch. The scouts from last night had vanished, but she knew they hadn't gone far. The undead were no fools. At the medbay, Dr. Tanaka was busy examining the quarantine runner. The creature lay motionless, but its eyes flickered with something almost human. She ran another scan, heart pounding. This isn't infection anymore, she told her assistant. It's evolution. Outside, the survivors began fortifying the walls. Men and women loaded sandbags, patched holes, and reinforced gates. The engineers worked furiously on the automated turrets, recalibrating them to detect heat signatures more accurately. Hey, Reyes. Rachel called over. Any word on reinforcements from the north? Mateo shook his head grimly. No. Radio silence since yesterday. Whatever's out there is jamming signals. Suddenly, the ground trembled, a faint, rhythmic pounding from the far side of the compound. The guards froze. The sound grew louder. Like the stomping of thousands of feet. Hayes grabbed a radio. Report. What the hell is that? One of the sentries, voice shaking, said, they're coming. Not runners this time. Heavy. Big. The fortress gates rattled violently as a monstrous force slammed against them. This was no scouting party. This was an assault. Rachel took her position on the wall, eyes wide with adrenaline. The floodlights cut through the gathering darkness, revealing a tide of hulking figures, bloated, broken, but terrifyingly relentless. Brace yourselves. Hayes yelled. The first wave smashed into the gates. The fences screamed under the weight. Sparks flew. Electricity arced wildly. Inside Bastion, panic flickered but did not ignite. Years of training kept the survivors disciplined. Mortars, someone shouted. The deep boom of artillery shook the ground. Explosions erupted, sending rotting limbs and torn flesh flying. But still, the dead pressed forward. One of the towers went dark. Rachel saw smoke curling from its base. Sniper down, she cried. She sprinted toward the stairs just as a burst of gunfire crackled behind her. Her heart hammered. At the bottom of the stairs, she found Sergeant Reyes dragging a bleeding soldier away from the wreckage. Get him to Med Bay. Rachel ordered. We're losing ground. The dead had breached the outer fence at one point. The second barrier held for now, but cracks were forming. Inside the command tent, Hayes' face was pale under the harsh lights. "We can't hold this much longer," he admitted. "The endless night is here. We need a plan, fast." Rachel stepped forward. "What if we draw them into the tunnels? The undead aren't as coordinated underground." Hayes considered. "Risky. The tunnels are narrow. If they collapse, we lose the last escape route." "We don't have a choice," Rachel said. "If they flood the walls, it's over." At that moment, an explosion rocked the command center. Dust rained down. "We've got a breach in Sector 9, someone shouted. Hayes clenched his fists. "Fall back to the tunnels. Now." The survivors scrambled toward the underground entrances. The air grew thick with smoke and panic. Rachel covered their retreat, firing at the advancing dead. Each shot felt like a scream in the dark. As she reached the tunnel entrance, a cold, unnatural whisper brushed past her ear. "Refuge won't last." She froze, breath catching. The same words. The same voice from the runner in the lab. Inside the tunnels, the air was damp and suffocating. Flashlights flickered on, illuminating graffiti-stained walls and broken pipes. The survivors formed a tight line. Reyes checked his ammo, eyes darting in every direction. "Stay close. Watch each other's backs." Suddenly, the ground shook violently, a tremor that rattled the tunnel walls. "Earthquake," someone gasped. "No," Reyes said through gritted teeth. "Sabotage." The undead above had found a way to collapse the tunnel entrances. Debris began to fall. Hayes barked, "Move! Move!" Rachel grabbed a child by the arm, pulling her through the chaos. The tunnel was growing darker by the second as dust clouded the air. Behind them, the sounds of groaning dead grew louder. They had one chance. One chance to survive the endless night. Darkness swallowed the tunnel in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the rubble pressing from above. The survivors' breaths came in shallow gasps as dust choked the air, their footsteps echoing faintly along the concrete walls. The collapse at the entrance had sealed them in, turning Bastion's last escape route into a tomb. Rachel's fingers trembled as she fumbled with her flashlight, casting a weak beam ahead. She clutched the small hand of the child she'd pulled to safety moments before, feeling the girl's heartbeat thudding erratically against her palm. "We'll find another way," Rachel whispered, forcing calm into her voice. Behind her, the others murmured reassurances, but the dread was palpable. The tunnels had been Bastion's safety net, a labyrinth that shielded them from the chaos above. Now, they were trapped underground with the dead pressing just beyond. Commander Hayes gathered the remaining soldiers in a tight circle near a rusted junction box. His face was drawn and tired, but his eyes burned with determination. "We hold here," he said firmly. "This tunnel leads to the old maintenance shaft. If we can clear the debris, it might be our only way out." Mateo Reyes wiped blood from his brow, scanning the darkness ahead. "The longer we stay, the worse it gets. Those things, whatever they are learning. Last night's scouts knew the layout better than we did." Dr. Tanaka emerged from the shadows, her hands clutching a tablet glowing with data. "There's more," she said quietly. "The infected aren't just evolving physically. Their brains, they're adapting faster than we expected. Some may even be coordinating attacks from above." Hayes nodded grimly. "That explains the signals we intercepted. They're organized. Strategic." Rachel's mind raced. If the undead were thinking, planning, then Bastion was in greater danger than any of them could prepare for. Suddenly, a distant rumble shook the tunnel walls. The survivors froze, hearts pounding. "What now?" Reyes growled. The rumble grew louder, then exploded into a series of violent thuds. Footsteps. Heavy. Uneven. Dead above. "Moving closer," Rachel whispered. The group tightened their formation as the sound echoed through the tunnels. A faint scratching noise emerged from the far end of the passage. Something was trying to claw its way through. "Barricade the entrances," Hayes ordered. Hands worked feverishly, stacking crates and metal scraps to block the path. The scratching intensified, turning into a frantic pounding. Suddenly, a shadow lunged out of the darkness. Rachel reacted instantly, firing a burst into the creature's chest. It collapsed, eyes wide with rage and confusion. More shadows emerged, snarling and snapping. The survivors fought tooth and nail, the narrow tunnel amplifying every sound, gunshots, grunts, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting concrete. A soldier went down, clutching his leg, a grotesque hand grabbing at his ankle. "Leave him!" Reyes shouted, firing as he pulled the wounded man toward safety. The battle raged, but the survivors held the line. When the last of the attackers was silenced, silence returned, heavier than before. Hayes checked his watch. "We can't keep this up forever." A voice crackled from Rachel's radio. "Command, this is North Gate. We've got movement on the west flank. The Horde's regrouping." Hayes clenched his fists. "They're surrounding us." "Then we fight," Rachel said, resolve hardening her features. But even as they prepared for the next onslaught, doubt gnawed at her. How long before the fortress they called home became a tomb? Dr. Tanaka approached, eyes shadowed with fear. "There's something else." "I intercepted a new message." Hayes signaled for silence as she played the audio. A distorted voice echoed through the tunnel, words warped and twisted but chillingly clear. "Refuge will fall. The endless night claims all." Rachel swallowed hard. The voice was unlike any they'd heard, hollow, yet alive. She looked around at the faces illuminated by flashlight beams, fear, determination, exhaustion. The war was no longer just survival. It was a battle for the future of humanity. And in the shadows below, the enemy was waiting. The narrow tunnel hummed with a tense quiet, broken only by the heavy breaths of survivors and the distant, relentless moans echoing from the labyrinthine depths beyond. The assault above had driven the living underground, but Bastion was not done fighting yet. Commander Hayes gathered the weary group in the central chamber of the tunnels. His voice cut through the thick, stale air with sharp authority. "We've lost the outer defenses, but the tunnels give us a chance to regroup and launch a counterattack. This is the last stand. If Bastion falls, the endless night wins." Mateo Reyes checked the weapons cache. Ammo was low, but spirits were harder to break. "We'll make every shot count." Rachel's gaze swept over the small circle of survivors, scared, tired, but unbroken. Children clutching makeshift weapons, old veterans steadying trembling hands. This fortress of humanity was all that remained. Dr. Tanaka paced slowly, tablet in hand. "The infected's intelligence is growing. I intercepted new signals last night. They're using a crude language, sending commands. They're adapting, learning." Hayes nodded grimly. "That's why they attacked with such precision. They know our layout, our weaknesses. But they don't know our will." Outside, muffled sounds vibrated through the tunnels. The enemy was massing above, preparing for another wave. Rachel tightened her grip on her rifle, heart hammering. "We set traps," she said. "Booby traps in the tunnels. We slow them down, make them pay for every inch." A group of engineers nodded, setting to work. The air filled with whispered prayers and hurried footsteps as survivors transformed the ancient corridors into a deadly maze. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. "Command, this is Scout Bravo. We found something. The source of the signals, it's a tower deep in the forest, transmitting orders." Hayes looked up sharply. "If we can take it out, we might disrupt their coordination." Reyes grinned grimly. "Sounds like a suicide mission." Rachel met his gaze. "Someone has to do it." "I volunteer," she said without hesitation. Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Gather a team. Move fast, and be careful." The tunnel's flickering lights barely pierced the gloom as Rachel assembled her team, a handful of the best fighters left. Their faces were set, each knowing the risk. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Tanaka approached quietly. "Be careful. There's more at stake than just Bastion. That tower is linked to something deeper. If we fail, the endless night spreads. Rachel swallowed hard but nodded. We won't let that happen. The exit from the tunnels was a hidden hatch covered in snow and debris. They worked quickly to clear it, aware of every shadow that might be watching. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, dark, silent, and foreboding. Snow muffled their footsteps, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed on them. Rachel led the way, every sense alert. They moved like ghosts, avoiding patrols and traps laid by the undead. Hours passed. The cold bit at their skin, and fatigue threatened to drag them down. At last, the tower loomed, a skeletal ruin covered in wires and blinking lights. Plant the charges, Hayes ordered through the comms. Destroy their command. Rachel's hands shook slightly as she set the explosives. The radio buzzed with intercepted signals, frantic, disjointed orders from the infected. Time to end this, she whispered. Just then, a chilling howl pierced the night, a signal rallying the undead forces. Suddenly, shadows surged from the trees, runners and hulks, faster and fiercer than before. Move! Move! Rachel shouted, drawing her weapon. Gunfire erupted in the dark forest as the team fought desperately to retreat. Explosions ripped through the night, the tower collapsing in a shower of sparks and flame. The synchronized signals died with it. But the cost was steep. Rachel fell hard, pain flaring in her side. Reyes pulled her up, dragging her through the snow. Behind them, the undead pressed forward, unstoppable, relentless. The endless night was far from over. The cold bit deep into Rachel's side, but adrenaline pushed her forward. Every breath was a razor slicing through the freezing air as she stumbled alongside Reyes. The forest around them was a silent graveyard of shattered branches and smoking ruins from the destroyed tower. The collapse had broken the undead's command signals, if only temporarily. But the reprieve was fragile. Behind them, the moans and snarls grew louder, echoing like thunder through the trees. The endless night was closing in. We need to get back to Bastion, Reyes urged, his voice low but urgent. They're already pushing the walls. Rachel nodded, gritting her teeth. Lead the way. Their path was treacherous, twisted roots and ice-slick rocks made every step a gamble. The forest, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. Shadows shifted unnaturally between the trees, eyes watching, waiting. As they neared the perimeter, a low rumble shattered the silence, a distant explosion echoed from Bastion's direction. Hayes' voice crackled over the radio, sharp with alarm. Enemy breach on the east wall. They're flooding in. Rachel's heart sank. The fortress was bleeding. We've got to hold the line, she whispered. If we lose Bastion, we lose everything. Reyes gripped his rifle tighter. Let's move. They pushed through the dark woods, the snow crunching underfoot, until the towering walls of Bastion rose into view, scarred but still standing. Inside the compound, chaos reigned. Survivors shouted orders, tending to the wounded, while soldiers fired into the advancing horde. The gates groaned under relentless pressure. Rachel sprinted towards Sector 7, where the breach had been reported. Explosions rocked the compound, sending dust and debris into the air. At the broken wall, the dead spilled inside, twisted bodies snarling with feral hunger. Hold them back. Hayes commanded, rallying the defenders. Rachel joined the fight, firing rapidly into the throng of attackers. Each bullet was precious, each shot a battle cry. But the numbers overwhelmed. A surge of infected broke through, flooding into the compound like a tidal wave. Rachel ducked as a hulking brute smashed a nearby barricade, snarling wildly. Reyes, flank left, she shouted, reloading. Mateo moved swiftly, tackling one attacker to the ground before raising his rifle. The defenders fell back slowly, regrouping near the central square. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the fortress. Panic threatened to erupt. Backup generators, someone yelled. Hayes cursed. We're blind in the dark. Use flashlights only. Rachel's pulse quickened as she heard the unmistakable sounds of the dead closing in. She spotted a shadow moving unnaturally fast, something different. A figure stepped into the weak glow of a flashlight, tall, gaunt, eyes glowing with cold intelligence. It was unlike any undead she had faced before. This is no ordinary horde," Rachel whispered. Dr. Tanaka appeared at her side, voice tense. "The evolution is accelerating. That's their new leader." The creature snarled and lunged. Rachel fired, but it moved with inhuman speed, dodging the bullets. Hayes shouted orders, but even his voice sounded small against the growing storm. The survivors fought desperately, holding ground inch by inch. In the darkness, every step could mean death. Every breath could be the last. The endless night was no longer a distant threat. It was here. And it was hungry. The darkness inside Bastion was thick and suffocating, broken only by the flickering beams of flashlights and the distant groans of the undead pressing closer. The survivors moved like shadows themselves, desperate to hold what little ground remained. Rachel's heart pounded as she scanned the dimly lit corridor. Ahead, the twisted form of the new leader paced with eerie calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Its glowing eyes bored into her soul, a chilling reminder that this fight was unlike any before. "Hayes, we need a plan," Rachel whispered into her radio, voice strained but steady. "We can't just hold the line, we need to strike back." Hayes responded, voice grim but resolute. "Agreed. I'm sending a squad to secure the armory. We'll need every weapon we can find." The survivors scrambled, gathering whatever firepower remained. The infection had stripped Bastion bare over weeks of siege, but hope still flickered in their hands. Dr. Tanaka approached Rachel with urgent news. "The new leader, it's controlling the others. It's more than a beast. It's something, almost human." Rachel swallowed hard, unease creeping through her veins. If the infection could evolve a mind, what else was possible? Suddenly, an explosion rocked the compound, shaking the walls and sending debris raining down. "Breach!" someone shouted. The survivors snapped to attention, rushing to contain the gap. Rachel and Reyes flanked the breach, firing into the advancing horde. "Hold steady!" Hayes barked. "We can't let them flood in." The undead surged forward, their coordinated attacks breaking through barricades like water through cracks. Rachel fought fiercely, side by side with Reyes, each shot a defiant stand against the tide. Amid the carnage, a scream tore through the darkness, a child caught between walls, cornered by a horde. Without hesitation, Rachel plunged into the fray, pushing past bodies and claws. She reached the child, scooping her into her arms just as a hulking infected lunged. Rachel fired point blank, the creature collapsing with a guttural snarl. Breathless, she hugged the child close. "You're safe now. We'll get you out." Behind them, the battle raged on. Hayes's voice crackled again. "We've secured the armory. Meet at command center ASAP." Rachel nodded, urgency surging through her veins. The path was a gauntlet, fallen comrades, undead masses, and twisted metal blocking every step. But the survivors pressed forward, driven by a flicker of hope. At the command center, the survivors regrouped, weapons stacked and faces grim. Hayes laid out the plan. "We take the fight to their leader. If we destroy it, the Horde's control will crumble." Reyes clenched his jaw. "And if we fail?" Hayes's gaze was steel. "Then Bastion falls." Rachel felt the weight of those words settle deep inside her. This was more than survival. It was a reckoning. The survivors armed themselves with whatever they could carry, Molotovs, rifles, makeshift explosives. The corridors ahead were a tomb, but also their last chance. As they moved toward the heart of darkness, Rachel's thoughts drifted briefly to the world beyond, the endless night swallowing cities, forests, and dreams. But here, in Bastion, hope still burned. And she vowed it would not be extinguished without a fight. The corridor ahead was silent, too silent. Rachel's footsteps echoed sharply against the concrete as she led the small band of survivors deeper into the bowels of Bastion. Every shadow seemed to twist and crawl, as if alive, waiting for them to stumble. At the heart of the fortress lay the source of the nightmare, the infected leader, a grotesque figure crowned by twisted flesh and glowing eyes. Its very presence warped the air around it, a dark command center for the undead horde. Hayes moved beside Rachel, eyes steely. "We end this here." The survivors readied their weapons, nerves taut. Reyes checked his rifle one last time. Dr. Tanaka whispered, "Destroying the leader could sever the horde's control. But if it's linked to the infection itself, it might trigger something worse." Rachel nodded, steeling herself. No other choice. Suddenly, the leader's voice echoed through the chamber, a chilling blend of human and beast. "You cannot stop the endless night," it hissed. "You only delay the inevitable." The fight exploded in a fury of gunfire, screams, and the sickening clash of flesh and metal. Rachel fired relentlessly, dodging a swipe from the leader's grotesque claws. Reyes tossed a Molotov, flames licking the walls and illuminating the horrific scene. Survivors fell, but their fire never waned. Hayes charged forward, planting explosives near the creature's lair. The leader roared in fury, lashing out with terrifying speed. Rachel dove aside, feeling the air slice past her cheek. Reyes tackled the beast, struggling to hold it down as Hayes detonated the charges. A massive explosion tore through the chamber, sending shockwaves and blinding light. When the dust settled, silence fell. The leader was gone. But the price was high. Bastion was shattered, corridors crumbled, and many lives lost. Rachel looked around at the survivors, bloodied, bruised, but alive. "We did it," she whispered. Hayes shook his head slowly. "For now." Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, washing the ruins in cold, pale gold. The endless night had been held at bay. But the war was far from over. Rachel stood at the shattered gate, watching as survivors began the grim task of rebuilding. Hope was fragile, but it was real. And as long as even one spark remained, humanity's final refuge could still stand. The endless night may be coming. But so was dawn.